hope it does do. Do you think that the Labour Party will be reinvigorated, free from the influences of what we think of as Westminster Labour, and become more radical?
It's possible, okay? Let me just say that there's a couple of quick points. First, one, the independence referendum isn't about trying to reinvigorate the Scottish Labour Party. The more direct way of trying to do that. I've heard people like Jim Sullers say, you know, the point of independence is to reinvigorate the Scottish Labour Party. No, you can be more direct way. You join the Scottish Labour Party and try and resurrect something that's not in a very good state. Also, the second point is that the state of the Scottish Labour Party is this thing you see in front of you at the moment, which is a rather curmudgeonly, you're talking to someone who was a member of the party for 24 years, and worked for the party in the 97 election, and try and have a non-black and white view of it, you know, despite everything. So the state of it is as it is. What is true is 2 points. One is if we have independence, the whole dynamics of how we do politics changes. So on the first point is we don't have a virulent Tory party winning significant numbers of votes. We don't have a big UKIP presence, even though they won 10% in the Euro elections, pulling all our politics likewise. We don't have that. The other point, though, is I think it's more fundamental, and I think you're sort of touching on it really, is how politics is done is going to change dramatically in this century. Political parties are Victorian entities, and really, in a way, what it is to be a politician is going to change dramatically through direct democracy, deliberative democracy, all kinds of new forums. And the system is going to try and use that to keep control, to be populist, etc., because that's what systems do. But there's going to be a great kind of like chance for, in this century, democratic awakening and more democracy, because we've had a very, very narrow, weak sense of democracy in Scotland. And this debate, this is one point I make in the book, is, because my book isn't about the independence question, it's about kind of where we've come from and where we're going, is that the independence debate is part of all that. And this is a chance for us to, you know, really, a kind of, not Scottish Spring, it's not as like as black and white as that, but something quite significant that's quite deep-rooted.
Yeah. To what extent do you think the new Scottish Government should resist lobbying from big business, and if so, how should they do it?
Crikey. You've hit a fundamental point here that, I don't know if people saw this, but about a month ago, Neil Asher said, you know, Neil Asher, a famous Scottish writer, and huge influence on lots of us over the last 30 years, he wrote a piece in a UK journal called Prospect, and he said that one of the arguments for independence for him was, he said that the British state, the British government, was basically a circle state, you know, circle outsourcers and kind of like, you know, basically take over public services and run them for profit, for them, of course. And what that brings, this is clearly true about the British state. The British state has been cannibalising public services for the last 20, 30 years. And one of the tragedies for some of us was that Labour, under Blair and Bragg, who I have to say did lots of good things as well as lots of terrible things in office, that they really accelerated this programme massively compared to Thatcher and Major. So it's true about the British state, but what he misses is that those organisations are entrenched in Scottish public services. So when I was doing this event in London, I was saying that a Guardian writer made the point that Serco have won the ferry to the Western Isles. They've just won the sweeper service to Fort William. So this is the point I'm making about public services and us thinking, you know, they're good, they're all right, we just defend them, the enemy's over the border. The issue we're dealing with is an ideology and a way of doing business and government, and it is here, and it is in the SNP, because it's a convenient way of doing stuff, and it's in the Labour Party, because the Labour Party privatised in Scotland, privatised prison services and so on. And how we get out of that is a huge battle about ideas, and it's something that, you know, post-crash, it's fascinating that the ideas that produced the crash are still there, alive, virulent, causing damage. And we can try to bring all sorts of, you know, transparency criterion, ethical rules into the debate about kind of, you know, income levels, how companies prosper from public goods. But fundamentally, what we have to do, as well as the micro, is we have to defeat that idea of people called neoliberalism, market fundamentalism. And it's not got as much of a foothold in Scotland as it has in Britain. But again, as the point I was making earlier, there's absolutely no room for complacency and thinking, you know, those forces don't exist here. So it's a battle, I think.
Make some comment on the Royal Mail and the renationalisation thereof, which I think the SNP have promised to become independent.
The issue of Royal Mail, apparently, in terms of how you identify the assets of Royal Mail, there are problems with that in terms of Scotland. But I think we can take back certain public services into public ownership. We can do that. We can force the commercial agencies to basically identify their assets and nationalise them. The issue would be not just cost and all that, and even legal issues. The issue will be, one of them is how we then run them, because we all know that you remember the jokes about British Rail, British Telecom. I mean, I remember, I don't know other people remember, I remember my parents when I was a child ordered the telephone and you waited weeks. I think you had two colour choices or something. Now, partly because when they privatised British Telecom, it happened to be the point where the telecommunications revolution happened in the world. Maybe state-owned BT would have, you know, changed. But the bigger serious issue is public services. They were known as the Morrisonian model, because basically the minister ran them, and you know the miners didn't run the coal mines, etc. We need to look at different models of public services, and here again I'm going to be controversial, that I do say in the book, right? Is Michael Gove, okay, bogey figure, you know, Scottish of course, and right winger, one of ours, you know. And so Michael Gove in education, you know, hated by teachers, they hate him, he hates the, what's it called, blob, the thing, the educational establishment, I can't remember. Anyway, it's called, I think it's called the thing, and he has advanced things, as you know, like free schools, which are autonomous schools, and it's claimed it's all pushy parents and things like that. Autonomous schools, free schools, things like that. But what those sort of things tap into, which is how do you decentralise public services? How do you give the public voice in public services? And left-wingers, but since the right has embraced the language of choice over the last 30 years, left-wingers have said, we don't like that, because it goes against equality, of course, because it means pushy parents or whatever, you know, push their kids, things like that. But we really need to explore those things, because there's a long left tradition of self-management, self-government, workers' control, how you actually bring workers in with kind of like consumers and the wider communities. And indeed, there was a whole fertile period of that in the UK, Scotland, and the whole West, even as recently as the 1970s. And it's a tradition that's died as, you know, this market fundamentalism has arisen, and the kind of the right have embraced the choice agenda. You cannot, this is one of my points as well, making the book about kind of public service, you cannot create a politics of the future just defending what you've got, because you have to learn to go with the grain of how society is changing. And one of the things in which the way society is changing is people want more individual self-expression, choice, things like that. And people do that as consumers, the way they live their lives. That isn't the same thing as neoliberalism. People can do that and have compassion, care, be solidaristic, you connect up in different ways. And that's one of the missing things in public service. And in a small nation of 5 million that rejects the neoliberal model, I think implicitly, if not explicitly, if we vote for independence, maybe that's just possible. Maybe that's possible that we could create different models, because there is an appetite for that. The challenges in the way you win consent and so on, and how you make difficult choices, need legitimacy. And you know, so it's not just about nationalisation or ownership, it's actually about what control and voice mean.
Yeah, you talked about how there are these myths about Scotland, people are left wing, etc. But obviously, in certain aspects, it's also true. Like Scottish people, obviously, very passionate and strong public services, which we've seen with the NHS. I was just wondering if you could say something about how these differences arose, and how did it happen that England, for example, became a Tory voting country, whereas Scotland became more Labour voting country.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Very curious.
Yeah, I know. It's one of my favourite subjects. It's like, that's right. I'm just trying. What's this in like 3 thoughts? Okay, right. Once Scotland and Ireland was that different. Okay. Now this was called the homogenisation thesis. This is the 50s and 60s. The argument was actually not just Scotland and Ireland. All Britain was getting more similar. And all that was differentiating people was whether you were a Labour or Tory. So in the 51 election, 1951, 97% of people voted both Labour or Tory. And when you get to 55, which is the famous year, as lots of people know, Tories won half the vote in Scotland, the gaps between the nations are very small. In fact, Tories won half the vote in England that day because they're just so genuinely popular. This is Anthony Eden, who some of you might not have heard of. This Anthony Eden is phenomenally popular. He'd been groomed by Churchill for about 20 years, and he's sitting there getting going slightly mad, something we know about, waiting to become Prime Minister. And then when he became Prime Minister, then invaded Suez and then had to resign because he lied to Parliament. Now, of course, that never happened to Gordon Brown, did it? Because he never invaded anywhere. So the countries weren't very different then. And what happens is from the 50s onwards, the 59 election, the first time Scotland and England, we're talking post-war, to keep it short, is that Scotland and England begin to diverge in voting habits. And that's because this is a time of full employment officially. Scotland has kind of like short-term unemployment, and it's got a relative lower growth in England, so Scotland starts swinging to Labour. So you have that from the 50s, you have the 59, the beginning of Tory decline, and basically from then on you have Tory decline, the rise of the SNP in the 60s, and you get to points like 1979 election when Margaret Thatcher elected. Well, until 1970, Scots had all basically voted for Tory governments. That happened at a UK level. 1970 is the first time Scots vote against the Tory government, and the Tories win at a UK level. Then 79, Thatcher wins, and they just begin to part company. The Tory vote crashes in Scotland, to the point to become a rump, and an ageing rump. And so part of this is Scotland seeing itself around these myths, because these myths have deep historical roots about education and collectivism and things like that, and the poverty lots of Scots experienced when Scotland had phenomenally powerful industries. But part of it is, and again I'm simplifying massively here because I wouldn't want to go into the whole story, but part of it is Scots believe, a significant part of Scotland believes in Scotland post-war dream that I was talking about, 45-75. And they see their industries going, when they see the British politics going more rightwards, when they see the Tory party going more rightwards, and Labour following to an extent, they want to hold on to something, and so they start to vote more Labour and SNP famously in the 74 Westminster election when they broke through, and then since devolution. Now, just to kind of summarise this, there's a debate that goes on in academic circles, which is a completely pointless debate as far as I'm concerned, which is the John Curtis versus others argument, which is the narrative and myth of difference. So there's a thing called, some of you have heard of this, called Scottish Social Attitude Surveys, and it gives out the values of Scots and the English, and it poses, when you get down to do you believe in comprehensive education, there's very little difference in values. Now, this is true on these findings, but what it misses is huge gaps on other things. So you take the 2010 UK election, and the gap between the Conservative lead in England, which is about, I think it's about, Conservatives ahead about 11%, and then Labour's ahead of the Tories in Scotland by about 25%. The point is the gap between the two countries is the biggest on record. So, I'm not posing the Labour vote's completely left-wing, of course, but the point is there's a huge amount of difference and there's a huge amount of similarity. That's the thing. So the narrative of difference or not difference is a completely pointless debate. Of course, if two countries have shared a union for 300 years are going to have some similarities. It would be rather strange if they didn't, and yet we've got this kind of politics of difference, and the difference matters. Because the point I would just make to you as a final point is, if we don't vote for independence, which is highly possible, and then let's say it's not 2015, let's say it's 2020 or 2025, we end up with a majority Westminster Tory government that 10%, 12% Scots vote for. Scotland won't stand for it. If we end up with a majority Tory government heading in the direction it's going, maybe out of Europe by then or other, Scotland will vote for independence a second time with, here's my little revolutionary thought, with the Labour Party, with the trade union movement, with a large part of civic Scotland behind it, because it's just the two nations are, how the politics are expressed, are heading in different directions, which are quite, well, could just become quite fundamental. Maybe we won't by next month, but I think we will continue in the same direction.
You think that would be better for the future of Scotland?
Which one?
The second referendum with a mass uprising with Labour and SNP going for independence.
Well, I've actually asked to write something on this for a presentation at Stirling University on Saturday, and which is about Scotland in 2056 looking backwards. And you know, it wasn't my subject, but it's a whole conference on the future of Scotland, and I did pose then. Right. I always thought there would be, I also thought when devolution happened to be an SNP government, and I one debate with Donald Dewar said that to me and disagreed, because I said oppositions eventually win. I said there'll be an independence referendum, because I thought the Labour devolution referendum made the SNP independence referendum likely as a policy. The SNP will embrace the independence referendum in 2004, because it decoupled voting SNP from the independence issue, just as Labour and devolution. I always thought it might be possible, highly likely, that Scots would take 2 votes to vote for independence, because the Scots are, I like to think they're radical, but also very cautious. And I think there's a huge part of Scotland, and I think it's very understandable, don't want to give up on the idea of the United Kingdom unless they have to. and you know, there's an element. I don't think it's a complete black and white debate, but there is an element of fundamental choice in a yes/no question on independence. And maybe Scotland just won't vote for it this time. And you know, maybe if we don't vote for it this time, maybe that's all right. I'm just posing that to some of you. You might think that's kind of a radical thought, because sometimes things just work out well. So let's say we either vote 52-48 for independence, you know, or 48-52 against independence. Now those are quite narrow votes. You know, maybe it might be better to not go for the fundamental change. I'm not saying I completely believe this, of course. It might be, you know, if you then voted, you know, 10 years down the line, 75-25. The corollary to that is some people say, you might not get a second independence referendum. John McTernan, who is no friend of independence, said this to me in the seminar I'm alluding to the other week. And I said that our independence referendums, the 10th UK constitutional referendum since 1973, UK never used to do referenda. They were things dictators did, and the continentals, as Attlee and Churchill used to describe them, you know, things Hitler and Mussolini did, you know, and things like that. Now we do them, because the British Constitution actually has positives in it as well as lots of negatives. It makes precedent up as it goes along, so that's why we've got an independence referendum. And once you have one, you can clearly have another, because you've made the precedent.
Actually, I had an event on Saturday at Luath Press where Henry Gleesh was speaking, and there was enlightening the audience about the forthcoming referendum in New Caledonia. I don't know if anybody's looked into this. Apparently, New Caledonia is a dependency or something of France, and they have a referendum in October, November, and apparently it's pre-arranged that the first referendum, if the result is yes, then independence. If the result is no, there's a pre-agreed further referendum in 4 years. If that again is no, there's a further pre-agreed referendum in another 4 years or something. And that's a tiny, well, it's half the size of Edinburgh.
Here's a transport question. So I was having this debate with my neighbours who are journalists about, it's the point of like, there's a real constant in the argument, Scotland can vote for independence, and then we might decide not to do it because the negotiations might be too difficult. So I made the point, what nation in the world, or place in the world, has ever voted for independence and it's not happened? My neighbour happened to call one. There's 2 examples in the world. Does anybody know them? There sadly are 2 examples, and they both never declared independence after they voted for it at all. Go and have a guess.
Rhodesia.
No. Well, one is Western Australia in 1933 voted for independence, and but because the decision has to go from the Australian government owned it, and kind of like, we're not really in favour of Western Australia declaring independence from us. And it never happened. The other one is a fascinating one. The Faroe Islands in 1946 voted something like 50.5% to 49.5%, in fact it was even narrower than that, for independence, and the pro-independence leader died right after the vote, and then there was nobody to basically negotiate, and the options were full independence or kind of like radical, you know, devolution, so we just thought, let's have radical devolution. And so sadly there are 2 examples, and you know, the way the Faroe Islands one, the Western Australia one doesn't really have any precedent for us, but the Faroe Islands one, you know, I'm not suggesting death or anything, I'm just saying, you know, that it's, I think the vote for independence will happen, but it's just, you know, there are sometimes where politics can operate in strange directions and consequences.
What do you make of the draft interim constitution the SNP have published from a left-wing point of view? And do you think there's anything fundamental in that that's worth hanging on to in the event of a no vote?
Well, I'm in favour of a Scottish constitution. And a lot of us have said this. We've been a little bit concerned about the fact of how the draft constitution has been the process of it. Because the draft constitution shouldn't be a constitutional convention, it shouldn't be written in secret, it should be something that is made by the people. In fact, I'm quite happy for something called Scottish Constitutional Convention, and it draws on the rich experiments that are going on at the moment, and indeed the huge international examples that are about new constitutionalism. I also think things like, things like saying, tuition fees or whatever, things that are actually everyday policy issues, putting those sort of things in the constitution are a little bit problematic. I think there are things about talking about the values of public goods and so on. So I think it's a draft, and the point is, it's then, you have to have a template. What is the meaning of a draft here? A template that groups of people can then work on and imagine and use to create an idea of a different future Scotland is a fantastic thing. And just a quick pointer, this is one of the problems in this debate, and one of the things we need to point out and understand. There are at least two debates going on at the same time, and one is the narrow constitutional debate on should Scotland be an independent country, and the other one, which is what kind of Scotland we want to live in, which is hopefully where the draft constitution goes, draws from what's called new constitutionalism. And new constitutionalism all around the world has seen a constitution not actually so much as an end point, but the process matters as much. The process is about how people imagine themselves to become a people, a collective people, and it also embodies things like economic and social rights, minority rights and protection, rights of women, etc., regional minorities and so on. So it's actually become a way of doing progressive politics, and the biggest exponent of this in the last 20, 30 years has been the movement of Latin America from dictatorship. And so there's all sorts of interesting examples there that we can actually draw on, like the Ecuadorian constitution and so on. And so this is part of this debate, isn't surprising, it's part of a worldwide trend of how you try and revitalise democracy and to face some of these challenges we're talking about, inequality, corporate power, and the tired version of party politics. And I think we've got a small chance of making a decent job of it. There are risks here because the future cannot be risk-proof. That's the nature of the future. And I'll just tell you what I said yesterday, because I never thought of saying it before. We were talking about inequality in Scotland, and again, it's a fact some of you know that a child born last year, a child Save Children report, a child born last year in the Calton ward, the East End of Glasgow, lives 28 years, his life expectancy is 28 years less than a child born in Lenzie on the outskirts of the city, 28 years. That figure is so shocking to me, and I think should practically be the centre of all Scottish public discussions, that basically, I think that, I'm not actually that interested in independence, again, this was my revelation yesterday. I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in the road, we mobilise our society to say that is wrong, and we care about it, and we're not just interested in our own little middle class, social democracy. And actually, if Ed Miliband used a British roadmap tomorrow that said this is what matters, and I'm going to do it, and I believed it, I would change my vote. Because that's what I'm interested in. It's not actually the state, the flags that I'm interested in. And I think that's a large part of this debate. There are people who the order or the flags matter to, being a separate Scottish state, all that. I think that's a minority part of this debate, that's a minority part of the SNP, and then there's a whole host of people who are pro-independence who are not part of the SNP. But I think we sometimes lose that because of those myths, we like to say, people do know, on the one hand, health inequalities are terrible in Scotland, but then there's still the sense of we're more egalitarian that kind of knocks it out. So I'd like to see that more centre stage, and it hasn't been an independence debate.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. Any more questions from the floor? If not, I've got a couple of juicy ones for Gerry to deal with, but yeah.
Take you back just a couple of years, instead of back to the 50s. What would you say are the kind of predictable things that have happened for you in the campaign, and what are the things that